Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new. I hope you're all doing well. These are all the books I read in June. Let's talk about them. Yes, it's my July wrap up. July was a really interesting reading month for me. It went really slowly, yet also really quickly because I felt like I didn't really read that much at all. However, the books I did read were like some of my new favourites of all time. And I DNF'd a lot of books as well. Like, it was such a weird mixed bag in July. So I'm intrigued to sit down and talk to you through my stats and like the books I did read and my thoughts. So without further ado, let's hop into all the books I read in July. I read a total of 6 books in the month of July, only reading a total of 1,985 pages, which I think may be my lowest reading month in terms of page count to date this year. However, once again, my star ratings were really good and they were the exact same as June. What are the chances? So I had 1 3-star, 3 4-star and 2 5 stars. But as I said, I did have some DNFs. I DNF'd Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson, which was the book club book pick for June in my local book club. Unfortunately, the writing style for me just wasn't it. It kept breaking the fourth wall and I just couldn't vibe with it. And then I also really sadly DNF'd The Legendary Girlfriend by Mike Gale, one of my favourite authors. This was his debut book that he wrote in he published it in 1997, 1998. So it just kind of like, I didn't have an interest in it. It was very mundane. It was very kind of like internal monologue-esque and I just didn't connect with it, sadly. So those are the 2 books I DNF'd in July. However, out of the books I did finish and complete, 5 of them were physical and 1 of them was an audiobook. So 5 of them were from my physical TBR and 1 of them was from Scribd. I read 3 contemporaries, 1 non-fiction, 1 romance and 1 mystery, spanning across 5 adult and 1 YA. Those books were The No-Show by Beth O'Leary, Love and Other Scams by PJ Ellis, Friends, Lovers and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry, How to Die Famous by Benjamin Dean, Hooked on a Feeling by JC Lee, and The Museum of Ordinary People by Mike Gale. The first book I finished in the month of July kind of didn't hit off July on a good note, and maybe that's why I felt like such a mixed bag in July. Maybe it was like foreshadowing something, I don't know. But the first book I finished was A No-Show by Beth O'Leary. I had this down as a 5-star prediction, and sadly, it just wasn't the case. It was 3 stars, it fell really flat, and I just didn't really see the point in this book. I kind of have come to the realisation that Beth O'Leary just isn't for me as a writer. I did really enjoy The Flat Share, but everything else I've read by her, I just haven't really enjoyed, and every time I read a synopsis of hers, I'm like, oh my god, this sounds like the best book ever, and then the execution just falls flat for me personally, and I just don't like them very much. I just feel them very mediocre, very fine, very kind of like read, enjoy, once done, dusted, forget and move on. So unfortunately this book wasn't for me, but the reason I did kind of fall in love with the synopsis of this book is because it follows 3 main characters, all female, who end up dating the same guy without realising, and it's kind of like the whole plot is about them and you get 3 different perspectives throughout the story, so you kind of get all 3 plot lines of the women dating the same guy, and then like the ending, just I kind of predicted it and I don't know, it just wasn't for me. Like, I think 3 stars might have been a push with a generous rating anyway. Thinking back on it, it felt like I read this book so long ago. That's how kind of forgettable it is to me, sadly. The next book I read, however, oh my god, was incredible. I wish I had a physical copy to hold up for you guys, and that was Love and Other Scams by PJ Ellis. I read this as an audiobook on Scribd because I wanted to pick something up that was quick and easy for my commute to and from work. And Mark, when we went book shopping for my birthday, which I'll link up above because I did a whole kind of bookish bingo book card for that video, which was really fun. So if you want to check out that, then I'll link up above. But one of the bingo cards that I had to complete was a Mark picks out a book, and he almost picked out this book, but I didn't want to get it because it was a hardback and I don't love reading hardbacks. So he kind of left it on the shelf and got me another one. However, I wish he had got me that one because I absolutely loved it and I wouldn't mind having a hardback version of it. And it's kind of like a contemporary mystery. It basically follows our main character, Kat, who's really struggling financially because she is a freelance graphic designer and really struggling getting from paycheck to paycheck. So on evenings when she isn't working, she goes to her local bar and ends up pickpocketing kind of the richer men who are all kind of like bankers. And so that's kind of how she kind of gets by. And then one day the barman of the pub notices what she does but doesn't say anything, and they kind of connect and create a budding friendship because this barman, Jake, becomes an ally because he also has a sleight of hand kind of is always kind of been into pickpocketing as well, which is a really interesting concept. And the way they come about a diamond heist is because Kat's best friend is getting married, but she is very different to Kat. She's always had this lavish luxury lifestyle and is about to marry one of the richest men in this fictional world. And she decides to, with Jake, try and steal her best friend's engagement ring. And oh my god, it's just such a funny book. I loved the characters, the character development was so good, the plot was just so intriguing, the ending was excellent, the writing style was so good. It was a perfect mix between like not realistic but realistic. There's a little bit of fake dating in it, which obviously you guys know I love some fake dating, and it was just like the perfect, funny, light-hearted book that I needed at that time, having just read a book that I was expected to be 5 stars and wasn't, and this book ended up being a 5 stars. I absolutely adored it, and I cannot wait for it to come out in paperback so I can add it to my bookish collection. Highly, highly recommend listening to it because I had a fun time listening to the audiobook, but I do think it's just a great book to read. If you're interested in reading it, I highly, highly recommend it. And then from that point onwards, I had a banging reading month from the books that I actually finished, minus the DNS. We don't have to talk about them. They are out of the window, forgotten about. But the books I actually finished from now on out were all 4 stars or more, which is, I had such a great reading month again in July, and I really hope this kind of momentum continued on to the rest of the year because I had a great reading month in June, and then July's also been brilliant, hoping August is the same and onwards. So the next book I finished, it's one of my new favourite books of all time. I finished Matthew Perry's memoir, finally. I started this book end of last year, just as I was moving out of home, and it just wasn't the right time for me to start such a kind of like heart-wrenching, kind of really detailed book that I wanted to fully focus on. It wasn't the right time, so I got about 60 pages into it and then just never picked it up again, and I'm so glad I did that and waited until now to read it because oh my god, my heart. In my latest Rachel's Reading Rambles, I cried over this book, so if you want to see like really raw emotions about this book, I highly recommend checking out that video because I'd filmed that video just after I finished this book, and so I feel like it's much more kind of close to home. But this book was absolutely incredible. I started my rewatch of Friends, so if you've seen that video already, you know that from this book I wanted to watch Friends from the beginning and go all the way through and kind of see Matthew Perry with a new set of eyes. Now I know what he's gone through during the process of Friends. So this book basically follows Matthew Perry's life as he deals with drug and alcohol addiction throughout his entire life, not just from fame. He doesn't get this addiction after he gets rich and famous, like I feel like maybe some celebrities' outcome, but Matthew Perry was always addicted to drugs ever since he kind of started drinking at the age of 14 with his friends. He saw his father do it every night. His father would come home from a hard day at work, who's also an actor, and he would drink a lot, and then the next day he would wake up absolutely fine and do it again, but he never got an addiction, his father. However, Matthew Perry saw that as kind of like something that he could do, but then he never kind of became his father in the fact that he could leave the drink at home and just go on about his life. Matthew Perry became addicted to a variety of drugs and alcohol across the path of his life, and it's just a really interesting read. I cried multiple times reading this out of happiness because of the features of Friends and kind of realising how much Friends kind of meant to him, but also crying out of like absolute heartbreak of what Matthew Perry's actually gone through and the many times that he's almost died because of his addiction. And I loved how he wrote this book, not for people to feel sorry for him, but just kind of like raise awareness of what addiction actually is. So I highly recommend this book, even if you aren't a Friends fan, to read it and just kind of get a new perspective on life, because I think Matthew Perry has a really interesting way of telling his story. You can see why he was Chandler being in Friends. Like, his humour is Matthew Perry's humour, and he fits into Chandler Bing perfectly because it was already within Matthew Perry to be this humorous. So he'll talk about almost dying and then end it with a joke. Like, very, very sadly, he almost died in rehab, and they thought he had stomach pains because he wanted to get out of rehab and get some drugs from the hospital, but he had really, really bad stomach pains, and it ended up that his colon had exploded. And he ends the scene, after all this dramatic, like, things that happened and him almost dying, he ends the scene being like, well, people say I was full of shit, but now I really am. And I'm just like, you can't do this to me. You can't make me like laugh through my tears of crying because I'm so sad. Like, it was so well written. I wish I could listen to the audiobook version because I'd love to hear it from Matthew Perry's like actual voice, but this book was so incredible. I'm so happy I tabbed it all up. Like, I tabbed it up with all blue and pink. So blue is obviously the sad moments and pink is anything related to Friends or maybe happy. And I wrote in it and I tabbed it all up, and I'm trying to find like a really good page. Like, completely just like happiness in this book because of like learning more about Friends. I'm a massive Friends fan, so like hearing like the insider scoop of Friends was fascinating and so exciting, and I absolutely loved that aspect of it. But I learned so much, even though a lot of this book doesn't feature Friends and doesn't feature his time during Friends. But I just learned so much, and some of the things in Friends, I could go on about this book for so long of like stuff I learned, and oh, it was so incredible, and I highly recommend it, and it's literally one of my new favourite books of all time. Like up there with Olive and All Boys Aren't Blue and Chef's Kiss. Like, I love this book to pieces. I will just come into the study, Mark will be working. The other day I came into the study and I literally just picked this book up and flicked through it and then hugged it. Like, this book will live in my head rent-free for the rest of my life, and I am so glad I read it, and oh my god, I love him so much. Yes, so that was the next book I read in July. Rant over about that one. After having a very emotional rollercoaster ride with Macapari, I decided to pick up a nice fluffy romance, and I picked up Booked on a Feeling by JC Lee. This is the last book in a companion series, so I finally finished another series. Yay, I've finished 2 so far this year. Look at me go. So this is the 3rd and final book in the Sweet Mess trilogy by JC Lee, and I absolutely loved A Sweet Mess when I read it in 2020, 2021, I don't know. Years merge when it comes to reading, and then I read The Dating Dare, which is the second one, and I didn't love it as much. I still gave it a 4-star. I gave The Sweet Mess a 5, and I'm giving this one a 4.5, so I really enjoyed this one. This is basically, if you want to hear a few book tropes, small town, bookstore, childhood friends to lovers, chef's kiss. This was so cute. So basically, JC Lee has created this like mini universe where the first book follows Aubrey and Landon. Aubrey is a baker, Landon is a food critic, and you kind of have a enemies to lovers sort of romance in The Sweet Mess. In The Dating Dare, you follow Landon's brother and Aubrey's best friend, Tara and Seth, and that one wasn't my favourite. It was more like a truth or dare kind of situation. Once again, friends to lovers. And then this one follows Lizzie, who is separate from the rest of the little gang, and then you follow Jack, who's Tara's brother, and Lizzie and Jack have a romance. And oh my god, it's so precious. Lizzie basically has real bad anxiety about her work when she's a really successful lawyer in like the city. However, she kind of gets really overwhelmed with one of her cases, and she decides to take kind of like a little bit sabbatical and go kind of back to her hometown. Her childhood best friend is Jack, and he lives in a small town just outside of the city, so she ends up surprising him and being like, hey, I'm going to spend 3 weeks kind of refreshing, taking a break after like my really heavy case, and just kind of like reset. And then they end up like falling for each other, and it was just so cute. I love JC Lee for the sexual tension. I loved how she featured all 6 of these characters in this book, so you really go on a journey from The Sweet Mess all the way up to Booked on a Feeling, featuring these characters, and every time you read one of the books, the other characters feature in those books, and it really just makes for a really cute kind of little universe that you've kind of delved yourself into. And I would highly recommend, because of that, to read these books in chronological order, because I know some companion series you can read them as standalones, and you can, but I think you'll get a hell of a lot more out of them if you read them in order. So going from A Sweet Mess to Dating Dare and then Booked on a Feeling. So this has been my favourite book out of the trilogy, I think, just because of how like you got a inkling into all 6 of these couples and how they're doing by the end of this book, that it's kind of felt like the end of a series, which it was, but because it was meant to be a standalone and obviously it's a little companion, it feels so perfect. I definitely feel this is more of a series than a standalone book, and oh my god, it was so precious. I loved it so much. And then I listened and kind of read along to How to Die Famous by Benjamin Dean. This is his latest release, kind of matches my jumper, by Benjamin Dean. It came out end of July, and Emily from Emily Catherine Reads kindly gifted me this book signed. Oh my god, so exciting. So she actually met him and got it signed, personalised to me. So I had to read this book ASAP because I am actually up to date with all the Benjamin Dean releases. I've read all of them, and I like the little pattern I've created. Both of his middle grades I've rated 5 stars, and both of his YA thrillers I've rated 4. So he's a really consistent author for me now, and he's definitely classified as one of my favourite authors. Just, I know that when I read one of his books, I'm just going to feel happy and content, and it's something that I can just ease myself into and not kind of think too hard about, and just kind of a good time. This book basically follows our main character Abel, who is struggling with his brother's death, and his brother died as part of a crew member on this really popular TV show, and The TV show is kind of cursed. They've tried to reboot it twice now, but every time they've rebooted it, someone has gone missing or someone has died. So Abel, because his brother died in the previous reboot as a crew member, he decides to audition for one of the main leads of this TV show that's getting rebooted again, and he gets that lead, and he's so happy because he gets to try and figure out what happened to his brother from the inside. He gets to be part of this production company, he gets to be part of this show and kind of really trying to figure out what happened to his brother to get some closure. And along the way, obviously lots of secrets get discovered, but you follow 4 perspectives, and the audiobook is multicast, so you get all 4 characters in different voices, and you get 4 perspectives. So you get Abel, who's trying to figure out what happened to his brother, and then you get the 3 other main characters who are also the leads in this like reboot of this show. So it's basically, the show is like a group of 4 friends going through high school, and you get perspective of every single one of those characters. And I just really enjoyed it. I don't think it kept me on my toes as much as The King is Dead by Benjamin Dean, but I still really enjoyed it, and I loved the multicast aspect of this audiobook. I loved being able to really distinguish between the 4 different characters, and I ended up loving the 4 characters individually as well as a group. I think they bonded so well together. I loved the ending. I feel like there has to be a sequel, like please be there a sequel, because it definitely left on the cliffhanger. Although it was kind of like neatly wrapped up, there's definitely like an inkling, there's definitely like an avenue for Benjamin Dean to go down for a sequel, and I would absolutely love a sequel. So overall, I just really enjoyed this book. I love the writing style once again because I just love Benjamin Dean. I thought the plot was really fun. I liked the way that Benjamin Dean kind of draws on his own experiences, having come from working at BuzzFeed and being a journalist, and how he kind of features journalism in all his kind of thrillers. I think it works really well, and I just really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad that I loved it, because obviously it's now signed to me, personalised, and it's a really special book to me. So yeah, another 4 stars for the month of July. And the last book I read in the month of July is another favourite author of mine, that's Mike Gale and the Museum of Ordinary People. This book sounds so mundane. I did enjoy it, I gave it 4 stars, but I do think it's the weakest Mike Gale book I've read so far, minus the DNF, because I'm going to forget about that ever existing. And so I've rated 2 5 stars, and this is my first 4 star from him. I did really enjoy it. The first half really felt like a 5 stars, and the second half kind of felt a little bit more flat. It was a little bit of more of a slower pace, which is fine. It just kind of like made me lose my interest ever so slightly. So this book basically follows our main character Jess, whose mother has just sadly passed away from cancer, and she's struggling to pack up her mother's home with all her things. And she ends up getting rid of a lot of things, because like you can't keep everything, but she ends up keeping a set of encyclopedias that her mother gave to her when she was younger, because that really kind of, for her, is like what she remembers most about her mother, is her kind of want for Jess to do well academically, and kind of that was the reason she gifted these encyclopedias to her Jess, because Jess always had like an interest in learning and museums. So she keeps these, and she takes them back to her boyfriend's flat where she's living. But her boyfriend is very much, you need to get rid of these, like they're taking up space, I don't want them, they're kind of like ruining my vibe. And Jess doesn't really know what to do with them, because she wants to keep them. They're a great memory of her mother, but she doesn't want to throw them away. But in the end, she can't find a home for them. She tries to sell them on eBay, she tries to sell them on, or like through friends of friends, and she's about to throw them in the trash when her best friend, who I absolutely loved as a character by the way, her best friend rings her up being like, hey, there's a place called the Museum of Ordinary People where there's just random objects from people's past. I don't know where they belong. They can go there and stay safe forever. And Jess goes along to this museum, and unfortunately the people who own this building aren't aware of the Museum of Ordinary People, and Jess has to explain her situation and her circumstance, and then they find this hidden treasure of loads of people's kind of ordinary objects that have been labelled up by this previous owner, of like reasons why they've been kept, who they were donated by, and kind of like the story and history behind them. And it's this whole conversation in this story about, are objects of ordinary people just as important as objects of like the rich and famous that you would go and see in a museum, like the V&A and like the Natural History Museum and all that sort of stuff? Are they just as important? Like a set of encyclopedias, they have a history, they have a story, they mean something to someone. Are they just as important as like the crown jewels? It's like one of those sorts of like conversations, and I thought it was a really interesting debate, and there's a lot to kind of like talk about, and I got Mark to have a little debate with me because I needed someone to kind of like talk to about this, because I thought the conversation was so interesting in this book. And I loved the main character Jess, I loved all the friends that she created along the way, and I think if you like The Repair Shop that's on BBC, I think you'd really enjoy the Museum of Ordinary People, because it has that sort of vibe where people bring things in that are once loved that no longer work, or kind of have a bit of like dust and damage too that need kind of repairing, and then these people come in, repair it, and kind of like really look after it and get it back up to new. And I think that's basically what this book is. So if you like The Repair Shop on BBC, then you would really like the Museum of Ordinary People, just of how heartwarming and kind of interesting some of the kind of history some of these objects are. So yeah, overall I gave it 4 stars. The beginning was a lot stronger than the second, but overall did really enjoy it. Loved the characters, loved the writing. As always, thank you Mike Gale for another heartwarming book. It didn't make me cry though. It's the first Mike Gale book that didn't make me cry. So these are all the books I read in July. I had a really strong reading month, minus this one. This one can go out the window. It's in my unhaul pile already. But I had a really strong reading month. Absolutely loved the rest of the books I read, obviously including Love and Other Scams by PJ Ellis. And I really hope that that reading kind of mojo and excitement of reading and the love of books kind of continues on into August. But let me know in the comments what you read in July. Did you find any favourites? Are you interested in reading any of the books I featured in today's video? Now you have heard my thoughts on them. Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a massive thumbs up and subscribe down below to see future content from me. I do monthly TBRs, monthly wrap-ups, weekly reading vlogs, and any other bookish content that you can think of. I usually have it on this channel, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. And without further ado, I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.